Imagine falling from the height of a 10-story building. Doctors say no one could ever survive that. But what if I told you that one man not only survived, but what happened afterward left even the doctors speechless? Today, you're about to witness one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever told. A story so shocking, it feels like it defies every law of science. And trust me, the ending will leave you with chills, because every time you think the worst has happened, something even more surprising takes place. How did he survive the impossible? What did the doctors discover that made them question everything they knew about medicine? And most importantly, what miracle kept him alive when every single odd was against him? Stick with me until the very end of this video, because each twist in the story is more mind-blowing than the last. And hey, if you believe in miracles or you're ready to be inspired, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe right now, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. Imagine standing on the edge of a tall building, the world below looking small, distant, almost unreal. For one young man, this wasn't a movie scene, it was his reality. The day had started like any other, filled with the ordinary chaos of city life, but within seconds, everything would change. Witnesses later described the sound of a gasp, the sight of arms flailing, and then horror. He slipped. His body was no longer balanced on concrete, but instead in free fall, plunging 10 stories towards certain death. People screamed. Some covered their eyes, others froze, helpless, unable to believe what they were seeing. A fall from that height was not survivable. Every witness thought the same thing. This was the end. Time seemed to slow. Each second stretched into eternity. Then came the impact. A deafening thud echoed across the street. Silence followed, the kind of silence that comes when every heart is holding its breath. No one dared to hope. No one expected movement. What they were about to see would shatter everything they thought they knew. As bystanders cautiously approached, they noticed something impossible. His chest moved, a faint rise and fall, a flicker of life. Somehow, against all odds, he was breathing. Panic and disbelief collided as calls to emergency services flooded in. When the paramedics arrived, even they struggled to process what lay before them. His body was broken, mangled by the fall, but his pulse, weak as it was, refused to stop. He should have been gone. By every rule of medicine, he shouldn't be alive. Yet he clung to life with a grip stronger than science could explain. Rushed into the ambulance, sirens wailed, piercing through the chaos of traffic as paramedics worked desperately to stabilize him. One medic whispered under her breath, "This isn't possible." Another shook his head, stunned as the man's heartbeat steadied when it should have faded. They had seen miracles before, but nothing like this. It was as if something or someone refused to let him go. At the hospital, doctors braced themselves for what they expected to be a hopeless case. The scans, the x-rays, the bruises, the fractures, everything screamed fatal. But when they examined him more closely, they froze. How was this man even still alive? His injuries were catastrophic, but yet there was something about the way his body responded, something unexplainable. Each test revealed another contradiction. Bones shattered beyond recognition, organs damaged, but somehow functioning. A heartbeat that should have stopped still echoed on the monitor, stubborn and strong. Family members rushed into the hospital, preparing themselves for the worst. But instead of grief, they were met with confusion and awe. Nurses exchanged nervous glances, doctors whispered in the hallways, and specialists were called in to witness the phenomenon. They didn't have answers. All they could agree on was one undeniable fact. They were staring at a medical impossibility. A man who had fallen from the sky, broken nearly beyond repair, and yet still alive. It was a story that none of them could explain, and it was only the beginning, because what happened next would take this story from unbelievable to miraculous. And if you think this fall was the shocking part, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. So keep watching, because every moment ahead will push the limits of what you thought was humanly possible. And before we dive into the next chapter of this incredible journey, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss the twists and turns that are still to come. This is more than survival. This is a miracle unfolding in real time. The ambulance doors burst open and the medical team rushed him inside. Nurses scrambled with stretchers, monitors beeped wildly, and doctors shouted orders over the chaos. Everyone expected that within minutes his heart would give up. But to their shock, it didn't. Instead, as they hooked him to machines, the heartbeat grew stronger. Broken bones? Yes. Severe internal bleeding? Absolutely. But the pulse on that screen was steady, almost defiant. One nurse whispered, "This makes no sense," while another tightened the IV line with trembling hands. The ER was used to emergencies, but this one felt different. It wasn't just survival, it was resistance against death itself. The scans revealed fractures from head to toe, ribs like shattered glass, and lungs struggling for air. A fall from 10 stories should have destroyed every chance of life. Yet, somehow his organs were functioning enough to keep him here. Doctors exchanged glances, some skeptical, others wide-eyed, as if they were witnessing something supernatural. They worked tirelessly, stitching, stabilizing, trying everything science had taught them, but quietly, each one admitted, science alone wasn't enough to explain this. Family members arrived, bracing for the words no one wanted to hear. But instead of grief, they were met with astonishment. A surgeon approached them with disbelief in his eyes. "We don't know how," he admitted, "but he's holding on." The family collapsed into tears, not of sorrow, but of hope. In that moment, the sterile room of machines and wires became a stage for something greater than medicine. Hours passed like minutes as the team fought. Every test contradicted the last, every outcome seemed impossible, and yet the patient's grip on life never loosened. By dawn, doctors stood in silence, exhausted but overwhelmed. What they had witnessed was not just survival, it was defiance against fate itself. And this was only the beginning. If you think this is extraordinary, wait until you see what happens next. Don't blink, because every twist in the story will leave you questioning everything you believe about miracles. And before we go further, remember, hit that like button and subscribe, because this journey is about to get even more unbelievable. They wheeled him into the operating room where bright lamps cut through the fog of panic, and the staff braced for a body that should have been beyond saving. For a room full of people schooled to read injury like a book, the pages refused to make sense. Scans had shown fractures, shattered ribs, collapsed lungs, and a pelvis that looked pulverized, but catastrophic bleeding that should have filled the abdomen was oddly minimal. Tissue that ought to have been torn instead held color. An organ that should have been ruptured sat strangely intact. The chief surgeon muttered that the pattern was inconsistent with the violence of the fall. As they peeled back clothing, another shock revealed itself. An old, thick jacket, crumpled in a lining that had collapsed on impact and absorbed energy like an improvised airbag, redirecting force away from vital zones. His belt had twisted and locked, distributing energy across the hips rather than concentrating it on the abdomen, turning everyday items into tools of survival. Blood work showed an unexpected resilience. Where trauma normally unleashed uncontrollable hemorrhage, his blood formed plugs at critical moments, a hyperactive clotting response that slowed bleeding enough for surgeons to act. A hematologist called the numbers strange and unsettled by what looked like an overcorrecting cascade, not disease, but a life-saving quirk of biology. Even more baffling were pale bands of old scar tissue hugging organs, healed microtraumas that acted like internal straps and prevented catastrophic displacement. The radiologist found signs of tiny healed injuries from years past that now functioned like bespoke safety harnesses. News of these contradictions spread, and specialists gathered, skepticism colliding with the dawning sense that this case defied simple explanation. Surgeons patched wounds, drained fluid pockets, and wired bones while debating whether survival came from anatomy, odd luck, or some combination neither bedside nor textbook could predict. Outside the OR, family members watched with brittle hope, clinging to murmured prayers and the flutter of information that arrived in fragments. Each procedure produced small victories that raised new questions. Minor fractures held unusually well, skin retained surprising perfusion, and the brain, though swollen, flickered with awareness and once squeezed a finger in response to a voice. Doctors, trained to translate probability into protocol, found themselves whispering the word miracle and then blushing at the very human impulse to name the unnameable. They cataloged findings: jacket, belt, clotting, scar tissue, but those clinical labels felt like parts of a puzzle that still refused a clean solution. Stabilization was only the threshold. The team debated whether such a chain of fortunate variables could ever be intentionally replicated, or if it was an accident of converging margins. Could a piece of clothing and a twisted belt truly be the thin edge between life and death? Could an overactive clotting response that saved him in the moment later threaten him with clots or organ strain? The questions multiplied, and specialists promised follow-up studies while the patient thought for each breath. In the quiet between rounds, one surgeon stood at the monitor and admitted, voice taut with both dread and wonder, that medicine could explain some parts but not the whole. He called it a case that would be studied for years, where anatomy, accident, and improbable timing stitched a survival together. The sense of a miracle did not replace clinical rigor, but threaded through every decision that night, sharpening focus and humility. As they closed him and moved him to intensive care, everyone in the room felt a tremor of disbelief, as if reality had shifted and revealed the seam where fortune had stitched life back together. The true test would be recovery, complications, or a return to grim statistics. And yet the day's discoveries had already rewritten assumptions in that hospital. The fall that should have ended everything had become a medical mystery that would haunt, challenge, and inspire those who witnessed it. If you're still with me, please hit the like button and subscribe right now, because the next moments will reveal not just how he survived, but a sequence of discoveries that will force even the most experienced doctors to rethink what they know, and you need to see every one of them to believe what comes next. Every twist includes evidence and witness testimony, culminating in a revelation that will leave you speechless. In the intensive care unit, the air was heavy with the constant rhythm of machines, monitors chirping in uneven harmony as doctors and nurses rotated in shifts that blurred into one another. He lay connected to wires and tubes, his chest rising with mechanical assistance. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary continued to unfold. The expectation had been decline, organ systems failing one by one, yet the opposite happened. Each hour revealed tiny improvements, blood pressure stabilizing, oxygen saturation climbing, and a brain activity pattern that suggested resilience rather than collapse. Nurses exchanged astonished looks as values that should have trended downward began inching upward. A cardiologist admitted quietly that if he had not seen the fall himself, he would have sworn he was treating a far less severe trauma. His body seemed to respond with a stubborn will, almost as if survival had become a mission coded deep within him. At night, when the ICU dimmed and footsteps echoed in long corridors, family members kept vigil, whispering stories into his ears, praying and clinging to hope. More than once, a tear slipped from his closed eyes, and nurses recorded these moments as reflex, but families insisted he was listening. And then came the night when his hand twitched at the sound of his mother's voice. A simple squeeze, faint yet unmistakable, electrified the room. The family cried, nurses gasped, and even the physician on call admitted it was beyond explanation for someone whose brain had endured such trauma. Word spread through the hospital, drawing staff who had finished their shifts back into the ICU just to witness what many called the impossible. But the surprises did not stop. X-rays taken the following morning revealed fractures aligning more cleanly than predicted, as if his body was accelerating its own repair. The orthopedic team stared at the images, trying to rationalize what they saw, debating whether the alignment was coincidence or something medicine had never documented. Specialists from neurology to hematology lined the hallway, each waiting for their chance to analyze him, and each leaving with more questions than answers. For some, it became a scientific puzzle. For others, a spiritual encounter. The ICU became more than a unit of care. It became a place of pilgrimage for staff who wanted to stand near the patient who should not have been alive. One resident whispered that she felt like she was witnessing history, that one day textbooks might record this as the case that changed how survival was understood. Days stretched into a week, each filled with new contradictions. The lungs, once collapsed, showed signs of healing far beyond expectation. The brain swelling receded faster than any steroid treatment alone could explain. Blood tests stabilized into ranges considered healthy, though no one could point to a clear reason. His resilience baffled every expert called in, and the word miracle, once spoken shyly, now circulated openly in corridors. Still, not everything was smooth. Complications threatened him. Fevers, infections, sudden dips in vital signs. But each time, just when doctors prepared for the worst, he rallied with impossible strength. It was as though every crisis became another chapter in a story no one could stop reading. Families clutched one another, torn between dread and awe, while staff found themselves rooting for a patient who had already rewritten what survival meant. And through it all, cameras outside the hospital began to gather, reporters whispering about the man who lived after falling from the sky. Headlines hinted at mystery, faith, science, and the unexplainable. Inside, however, the focus was more intimate. One human life fighting against the odds and proving every assumption wrong. As the days passed, the question shifted from whether he would live to how far he could recover. Each breath, each movement, each flicker of awareness hinted at more than survival. It hinted at a return. And the journey ahead promised revelations even more astonishing than the fall itself. So, if you're still here, don't miss what comes next, because the next part of the story will challenge everything you thought was possible. Hit that like button and subscribe right now because you need to see how this miracle continues to unfold. The recovery phase began like walking a tightrope between hope and disaster. Every hour felt uncertain. Every beep of the monitor carried weight. Yet with each passing day, he revealed something no one anticipated. Doctors prepared families for permanent disability, warning that even if he survived, he might never wake fully or move again. But then his fingers shifted deliberately, not once, but several times, as if responding to voices around him. Soon after, his eyelids fluttered, hesitant at first, until one morning they opened wide and met the gaze of the nurse at his side. She froze, her clipboard falling from her hands, before whispering, "He's awake." What should have been weeks or months of coma compressed into days, shocking every specialist. He blinked against the light, confused, groaning in pain, yet undeniably present. The ICU erupted in stunned disbelief, staff calling one another to witness the impossible moment. Families rushed to his side, their cries mixing joy and sorrow, while doctors scrambled to adjust care protocols, unsure how to proceed with a patient who refused to follow medical expectations. His speech came slowly, broken words forming like fragile bridges across silence. But they were words, and they carried meaning. Each attempt filled the room with a mix of awe and fear, because no one could explain how his brain had recovered so quickly. Therapists arrived expecting to begin at zero, but he surprised them again by squeezing hands with deliberate pressure and lifting his arm against gravity. These were milestones usually celebrated months into rehabilitation, not days after catastrophic trauma. The news spread across the hospital, staff crowding windows, whispering about witnessing a phenomenon that blurred the line between medicine and miracle. Doctors debated fiercely, some insisting on hidden protective factors, others admitting there was no scientific model that accounted for his progress. Every new sign of strength contradicted textbooks. His body, battered and broken, rebuilt itself as though guided by something unseen. Meanwhile, outside, the world caught fire with headlines. Reporters camped at the hospital entrance, eager to capture updates, framing him as the man who should have died but lived. Social media exploded with theories from divine intervention to experimental science, turning his survival into a global conversation. Yet inside his room, the focus stayed human, intimate, raw. The way his mother held his hand, the way nurses cried behind masks, the way seasoned doctors admitted quietly that they were humbled by what they saw. Each day was a balancing act of triumph and terror. Fevers returned only to vanish inexplicably. Infections threatened but subsided without explanation. Surgeons expected setbacks but found bones knitting at speeds that defied prediction. It was as if his body had entered a different rhythm of healing, one not bound by ordinary timelines. And through it all, he began to smile. Faint at first, but growing stronger, lighting the room with something that no machine could measure: willpower. His determination seemed to feed the very biology of his recovery. Therapists shook their heads in disbelief as he stood with support far earlier than expected, each movement another defiance of fate. Visitors left with tears, whispering that they had seen something holy. Specialists wrote notes with trembling hands, unsure how to translate what they witnessed into clinical language. Some called it luck, some called it faith, others called it destiny. But all agreed on one thing: this man had rewritten what survival meant. And just when everyone thought they had seen the greatest surprise, something else happened that left even the most skeptical voices silent. He asked, with broken breath but clear intention, what had happened to him. He wanted to know the story, to hear the impossible truth. And that question, simple yet profound, reminded everyone that the miracle was not only that he survived, but that he returned with a mind ready to understand, a spirit ready to fight, and a story that would inspire the world far beyond the walls of the hospital. If you're still watching, make sure to like and subscribe, because the next stage of this journey will take everything you thought you knew about recovery and turn it upside down. Rehabilitation began as a cautious experiment, a process doctors expected to stretch over years. But with every step, he turned predictions upside down. Physical therapists approached him gently, expecting a man unable to lift his own weight. But when they encouraged him to move his legs, he shocked the room by shifting them on command. Gasps filled the ward as therapists rushed to support him, unable to believe what they saw. Within days, he was sitting up, wincing in pain, yet smiling defiantly, each movement a reminder that he refused to accept the fate outlined in medical charts. Doctors whispered that even the strongest patients with lesser injuries rarely progressed so quickly. Yet here he was, challenging every expectation. Speech therapy sessions that should have dragged for months transformed into lively exchanges, his broken words sharpening into coherent sentences that carried humor, fear, gratitude, and determination. Nurses recorded progress notes filled with exclamation points rather than cautious remarks, astonished at the acceleration. Soon he was walking between parallel bars, each shaky step accompanied by tears from staff who had doubted he would ever stand again. By the end of the week, he crossed the room unaided, his family cheering while doctors struggled to explain how his balance had returned so swiftly. Specialists pored over his case, debating whether biology alone could account for his progress or if his sheer willpower was pulling his body into healing. One physician admitted he felt like science was watching faith play out in front of him. And then came the most extraordinary moment of all. He requested to see the rooftop from which he had fallen. Against medical advice, but under careful supervision, he was wheeled to a window with a view of the building that had nearly taken his life. Silence filled the room as he stared upward, eyes glistening, before whispering, "I shouldn't be here." Those words echoed through the staff who had fought for him, a reminder that they were not just treating injuries, but witnessing history. Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines labeled him the man who defied gravity, the miracle survivor, the patient science couldn't explain. Messages poured in from around the world, strangers writing letters of hope, parents showing his story to children, churches and communities lifting his name in prayer. His recovery had become bigger than medicine. It had become a symbol. Yet in the quiet of night, when the cameras left and the corridors dimmed, he confessed to his closest nurse that he felt chosen for a reason he could not yet understand. His story wasn't finished. Survival was only the beginning of a greater purpose. Researchers requested permission to study his case, journals demanded reports, and television crews prepared documentaries. But those closest to him knew that beyond the headlines was a man rediscovering life one step at a time. His laughter returned, his appetite grew, and with every milestone, the impossible felt more like destiny. Still, doctors cautioned that challenges remained. Lingering pain, fragile bones, the risk of setbacks. But he met every warning with resilience, smiling as if he carried knowledge beyond medical charts. His journey was no longer about statistics. It was about rewriting possibility itself. And as his strength grew, so did the sense that the miracle was not just his survival, but the ripple it created in everyone who witnessed it. Each nurse, each doctor, each therapist carried away a renewed belief in the extraordinary, and families waiting in the hospital found hope in hallways where despair usually lived. His story spread like fire, igniting courage far beyond hospital walls. And this was not the end. If you think this was the peak, wait until you see what comes next, because the final chapters of this journey will deliver revelations no one saw coming. Like and subscribe now because the miracle is only getting bigger. The day of his first public appearance arrived, a moment the hospital had kept private for weeks, but could no longer contain as reporters flooded the entrance and people around the world waited for proof that the miracle survivor was more than a headline. Staff escorted him to a conference room converted into a stage, cameras flashing wildly as he appeared walking slowly but unaided, his steps uneven yet firm, his face lit with the quiet strength of someone who had fought death and won. Gasps swept the crowd. Doctors stood in the back with folded arms, hiding tears, and his family clasped one another's hands in disbelief. He sat before microphones and took a deep breath, his voice still rough, but steady as he thanked the medical team, his loved ones, and everyone who had prayed. Journalists expected scripted gratitude, but what he said next stunned the world. He described fragments of memory from the fall, not just the terror of air rushing past him, but the overwhelming calm that embraced him in the seconds before impact. He spoke of a warmth, a light he could not explain, and the sense of being held by something beyond himself. The room fell silent as cameras captured every word, audiences around the globe replaying the footage again and again, debating whether it was trauma's trick on the brain or a glimpse of something divine. Doctors exchanged nervous glances, unwilling to publicly endorse what they could not explain, yet unable to deny the power of his testimony. For his family, it was confirmation of what they had felt all along, that survival was more than biology, that something greater had intervened. In the days that followed, his story dominated news cycles. Experts argued on television, some insisting on rare protective factors, others daring to admit that not every outcome could be measured by science. Social media erupted with millions of comments, many calling him a living miracle, others questioning every detail, but all unable to look away. He became a symbol, not just of survival, but of the mystery that surrounds human existence. Meanwhile, in quieter moments away from cameras, he focused on simple joys, walking outdoors, feeling sunlight on his skin, sharing meals with his family. These small victories carried more meaning than the roaring applause of strangers. Nurses who had cared for him in his darkest hours visited and were moved to see him laughing, upright, alive. They spoke of renewed faith in their work, of remembering why they chose medicine. His case notes circulated across the universities, studied by students who debated how a fall from such height could result in a recovery so complete. Researchers ran simulations, tried to recreate the physics, the anatomy, but the math refused to match reality. Again and again, they circled back to the same conclusion: this survival could not be fully explained. And the man himself embraced this uncertainty. When asked how he survived, he simply smiled and said, "Maybe I wasn't meant to go yet." His humility disarmed skeptics, his honesty inspired believers, and his resilience became a beacon of hope. Strangers wrote to him from hospital beds, soldiers from war zones, families from disaster sites, all saying the same thing. His story gave them courage to keep fighting. And though he was grateful, he admitted privately that the weight of being called a miracle sometimes felt heavy, as if he now carried the hopes of millions on fragile shoulders. Yet he bore it with grace, determined to turn his second chance into a mission greater than himself. The press conference ended with standing ovations, reporters chasing questions, doctors shielding him from the chaos, but the world had already received what it came for: undeniable proof that the impossible had happened. Still, the most breathtaking twist was yet to come, because his journey was far from over. If you think you've heard the full miracle, stay with me, because the final chapter will reveal something that even he never expected. Don't forget to like and subscribe right now, because the ending of this story will leave you speechless. Weeks after the press conference, the world thought they had seen the end of his story. But behind the hospital walls, something even more astonishing was unfolding. Doctors who continued to monitor his recovery noticed patterns in his healing that simply refused to follow normal medical logic. Broken bones that should have taken a year to fully mend showed near-complete regeneration in months. Internal injuries that were expected to leave permanent limitations vanished, as if erased. Each test result came back cleaner than the last, and every specialist who reviewed his scans shook their head in disbelief. What began as whispers in the hospital corridors soon became heated debates in international conferences. Was this man's body rewriting the rules of recovery? Journalists dug deeper, uncovering details from the night of his fall that only added more mystery. The angle of impact should have shattered his spine. The force should have ruptured organs beyond repair, yet somehow none of that happened. Some experts labeled it statistical anomaly. Others dared to say miracle. Meanwhile, he lived quietly, more focused on using his survival to help others than trying to explain it. He began visiting trauma patients, walking into rooms where hope was almost gone, and simply telling them his story. Faces that carried despair lit up with renewed determination. Families who had already said their goodbyes suddenly believed again. His presence became more powerful than any lecture or research paper. People weren't inspired by theories, they were inspired by the man who had walked through death and returned. As months turned into a year, his transformation reached its peak. He not only regained full strength, but accomplished feats doctors had forbidden him from ever attempting. Running marathons, climbing mountains, even skydiving to confront the very fear that once nearly ended his life. Each achievement was broadcast around the globe, every image a reminder that the impossible had not only been survived, but conquered. His story was adapted into documentaries, books, and countless interviews, yet no retelling ever captured the awe of seeing him in person. Those who met him often described the same sensation, a strange calm, a feeling that being near him made the impossible suddenly feel possible. Some called it energy, others spirit, but for him it was simply gratitude. He often said he woke up every morning knowing he should not be alive, and that knowledge fueled every step, every word, every act of kindness. Eventually, the medical board released its final report, a document spanning hundreds of pages, filled with data, yet concluding with one line that left even the most hardened skeptics unsettled. This survival remains unexplained. And that was the truth. No science, no formula, no expert opinion could cage the enormity of what happened. His survival became a reminder that human life holds mysteries far beyond what we understand. On the anniversary of his fall, he stood at the edge of the very building where it all began. Crowds gathered below, news crews pointed cameras upward, but this time there was no fear in his eyes. He raised his arms, not in defiance of death, but in celebration of life. Cheers erupted, tears streamed down faces, and for a moment, the entire world seemed united by the impossible. And as he walked away from that rooftop, he whispered words that would echo for years to come. "I was given a second chance, and I will not waste it." His story became more than a survival tale. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt their end was written. And right now, if you've been moved by this miracle, hit that like button and subscribe, because the stories we share here prove that no matter how impossible life may seem, there is always another chapter waiting to be written.